This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage with audiences, and sell anything from products to content to time. All in one place, all on your terms. I've had a haircut and I feel like I like it, but my head looks really small and I'm not used to it. I have a tiny little head. Hey Spuds, it's Jamie. Welcome back to another video first on the channel. I don't know, but welcome either way. And I hope if you're tuning into this video, you watched last Wednesday's video, the video I made a week ago, probably a week ago, Trans History Part 1, because today I am here for Trans History Part 2. This is the 20th century version. So if you missed it, the first episode was about trans people and trans communities right from very, very early civilization, thousands and thousands of years ago, up until the turn of the 20th century. And today I am back to talk about trans people and historical trans figures from the 20th century, as in the past 125 years. Technically we're the 21st century now, but from the turn to the 20th century, not just the 20th century. Like in the first episode, this video is very much a whistle-stop tour of different communities, events, and individual people from the 20th century who are trans. It's by no means comprehensive, but I do hope it can give a nice little overview and introduction to the topic. I know it might seem disproportionate that I spent an entire video talking about literally 10,000 plus years of history, and now an entire video that's probably going to be a similar length on the past 100 years of trans history, but there is a disproportionate amount of information about trans people and trans communities in the last 100 years compared to all of the time before that. Plus, I really wanted to be able to focus on what's been happening to the trans community in more recent times, and I'm not just talking like the past 10 years, I am talking the past 100 or so years. Because there have been some incredibly dark times for trans people that are more well documented and more well understood than things that maybe happened 5,000 years ago. This includes 1930s Germany and the Nazi raid of Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute of Sex Research. So basically, moving into the 20th century, there was a lot more readily available information about trans people, trans communities, and the lives and experiences of the trans community during this time period. A lot of it is still, and particularly when we look at the earlier side of the 20th century, a lot of this information is still recorded through a cisgender and oftentimes hostile lens towards the trans community, but there has been a growing amount of trans-led and trans voices actually writing and creating and documenting their own lives, and trans people being able to access what we now know as more modern day gender affirming care. One of those trans people is Carl M. Baer, who's believed to be one of the first people to have undergone what we now see as the modern day sex reassignment procedure back in 1906 under the care of Magnus Hirschfeld. Carl was intersex and assigned female at birth, although from available details it is believed that if he had been born now, he would have been assigned male at birth. This really raises an important question of when people are intersex, when there's some slight ambiguity, what has been inherently understood and led to categorization of either female or male has changed over the past 100 years, providing yet another blow to the bigots' notion of basic biology and strict sex and gender binaries. As was common with many intersex people of the time, Carl was not told his own medical history, and he grew up with a lot of anxiety around being assigned female. As puberty hit, he developed a deeper voice, but believed this was due to tuberculosis, and he also found himself attracted to women, something that at the time was thought of as a very masculine trait. This has since been debunked. As he got older, he found community with fellow queer people, and he accepted his attraction to women, identifying for a time as a lesbian. Gradually, he became more and more involved in the community as an advocate, and he began using he, him pronouns and presenting as a man, something he received significant pushback for. Then, after an accident put him in the hospital, Carl confided in one of his doctors about how he was feeling. And with the discovery of his intersex status, that doctor called for Magnus Hirschfeld. We need to take a little quick digression into the history and who Magnus Hirschfeld actually is, and we will come back to him in a much larger way later on in the video, but just for the context of this moment, I think it's important just to give a little bit of his background. He was a German Jewish doctor and a leading researcher in sex, sexuality, and gender. He lectured widely on these topics, wrote a lot of material, taught a lot of students, treated and advised patients, and promoted the rights of those who did not conform to the sexual or gender norms of the time. He was one of the first to suggest that a wide variation of gender identities exist, and also that sexuality and gender identities were a natural variation among humans. He advocated that no judgment should be attached to one's gender or sexual orientation, and he worked to spread awareness and promote acceptance of those who did not conform to the typical expected standards of the day. We will be be circling back to Magnus very soon, but I thought you needed that little bit of context for the next bit to make sense. So Magnus Hirschfeld suggested a little surgery to Carl in 1906, and this ended up making Carl one of the first recipients of the more modern day gender affirming care in terms of surgery. A year later, Carl was able to change his papers and marry the woman he loved. Unfortunately, after becoming an important Jewish man in Germany, he became a target for the Nazis when they rose to power in the 1930s, and in 1937 he was captured and tortured. He was released in 1938 though, and he would go on to live in Palestine in a polyamorous relationship and worked as an insurance agent until his death in 1956. There was a lot of interest in his life and it was adapted into a film. Unfortunately, the first movie was destroyed by the Nazis. Which brings us back round to Magnus Hirschfeld, who is the next person we're going to be talking about in this video. So in 1919, Magnus Hirschfeld established the Institute of Sexual Science, the very first of its kind. It offered medical care, professional training, research opportunities, and public sex education. He provided treatments for things ranging from STIs to unwanted pregnancy and impotence, as well as developing some of the earliest gender-affirming surgeries, earliest modern gender-affirming surgeries. While many Germans embraced his work, many others did not. And Magnus was subjected to attacks on his work, his Jewish ancestry, and his sexuality. In the early 1920s, he became the victim of even more vicious attacks, was badly beaten, and this was something that the newspapers actually celebrated. Horrific.
Disgusting.
He left Germany in 1930 to go on a global lecture tour, and upon his return to Europe in 1932, he was warned to stay away from Germany. This was due to the growing influence of the Nazis, making Germany a potentially dangerous place for him to be. So he ended up settling in Switzerland and did not return to Germany. In 1933, the Nazis ransacked Hirschfeld's institute, looting its library and archive. The stolen records, files, and books were publicly burnt by the Nazis, along with a bust of Hirschfeld himself. The Institute of Sexual Science was then forcibly closed by the Nazis shortly after. Much of Hirschfeld's work was destroyed when the Nazis burnt everything, and this event was widely recognized as being something that has set trans research and trans knowledge back a long, long way. This event was something that was denied by a very prominent TERF, aka J.K. Rowling. Magnus Hirschfeld will come up a lot throughout this video, particularly for the early to mid 1900s, including in the story of Lily Elbe, who was a Danish painter born in 1882. She reportedly underwent the world's very first gender reassignment surgery. Not the world's first though, just believed to be the world's first documented. She had her first surgery in 1913 performed by gynecologist Kurt Warnecross, and I'm sorry if I'm completely ruining these names, I really apologize. And she was examined by Magnus Hirschfeld. She had a series of operations during 1930-1931, but unfortunately passed away after complications after her fifth surgery in 1931. The story of her life and transition was published shortly after her death and retold in the Danish Girl novel, and then later in the movie adaptation where she was portrayed by Eddie Redmayne. And the whole conversation about cis actors playing trans roles is for another day. There's also Dora Richter, a German transgender person born in 1892, and she's actually thought to be the first trans woman to have undergone gender reassignment surgery, but this was not as documented as Lily Elbe. In her 20s, she was arrested for the crime of cross-dressing. She was jailed, but then a sympathetic judge released her into the care of Magnus Hirschfeld. Yeah, I told you he was going to come up a lot. Hirschfeld's institute employed Dora, as it did with many trans people at the time, and in 1922 she had her first trans-related surgery, and 9 years later she had a vaginoplasty. For a long, long time it was believed that Dora actually died during the Nazi raids of the institute, or potentially in custody shortly after the raids. As from 1933, nothing was known of what happened to Dora. However, that was up until 2023. 90 years later, Dora was found. As in, evidence was found that she was alive post-1933, she was alive in 1946, after World War II was over, and there's evidence that she lived for a further 20 years, passing away in 1966 at the age of 74. When I was doing research for this video, I literally came across an article that was like, Dora Richter, the trans woman who is believed to have been killed by the Nazis during the raid on the Institute, and then very quickly after, I was like, oh, this newer article that was written like 2 years after the first one I found was like, she's been found, she was alive, and I just kind of love that concept that this trans woman like went on to live her best life away from the Nazis. Then we have Michael Dillon, who's a British doctor believed to be the first transgender man to have undergone phalloplasty surgery. He started taking testosterone in 1938 after reading an article from a doctor who wrote about the experiences of women taking testosterone and what happened to them. He's considered to be the first recorded trans person to take testosterone exclusively for the purpose of gender-affirming treatment. He had to leave his job at a laboratory after being outed and found new work at a garage in Bristol and worked worked there during World War II. Whilst there, he began writing his book that would later become his 1946 book, Self, A Study in Ethics and Endocrinology, and is considered to be a pioneering piece of work in the study of transgender medicine. He was able to have a double mastectomy in 1942 from a sympathetic plastic surgeon, who also encouraged him to legally change his name and sex, and told him about the work of surgeon Harold Gillies. Gillies had become known in part due to his pioneering surgeries on intersex patients as well as injured soldiers, including the reconstruction of penises. Say hello to phalloplasty, which Gillies agreed to perform on Michael Dillon, but only after World War II ended. At the time, gender-affirming surgeries were seen as a mutilation on a healthy body, and honestly, some people in society have not progressed in their worldview in the past, what is that now, 80 years. However, fortunately for Dillon, Gillies believed that performing such surgeries was moral and correct as it brought happiness to the patients, a view that is now supported by our current knowledge of people and medicine. However, there is still a lot of people that are stuck 100 years ago. Dillon was able to move through the world and live his life as a man for the rest of his life, and was even accepted by some of his family members. And before we speak about the person who's considered to be the first transgender celebrity, I guess, I want to talk to you about something else historical. I'm very sorry to announce that my very real and not at all made up toilet paper subscription service is also history. Sheet Happens is no longer. I'm having to wipe clean the slate and shut up shop. Because Squarespace allowed for the creation of such an amazing website, it's meant that I've sold out, and I've used up all of the toilet paper materials in the entire world, which basically also means there's not going to be any toilet paper available. I am very sorry about that. But like the name of my company, Sheet really does happen. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring today's video. The all-in-one website design platform where all of your ideas can unroll endlessly, just like a fresh new roll of 3-ply luxury toilet paper. Squarespace not only allows for the smooth and easy creation of a professional looking website, but also makes it easy to organize and customize everything you need using their asset library. You'll be able to upload, organize, and access all of the content you need for your site from one central hub. Squarespace really meant that an amazing website could be created to sell my toilet paper dreams. But what really kept things rolling was all the tools needed for an epic online shop. Getting paid for my paper. Squarespace makes it super easy to get paid for your products and services with their flexible payment options. Checkout is seamless for customers, like a perfect tear along the perforation, and they can pay using credit cards, PayPal, and even Apple Pay. No wonder I sold out of rolls so fast. Business was absolutely wiping the floor and wiping the world of toilet roll. Charbonne's actual Squarespace website was superbly easy and honestly a clean experience from start to finish. Squarespace gave us the freedom to get creative, link our social media, and show off our podcast 1-800-DRAMA. We can even use Squarespace's handy analytics tools to check the number of visitors and top geographical locations. You'll have all the data you need to grow your website. No clogging, no mess, and definitely no double flushing required. To get yourself started, go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, don't stall and head to squarespace.com/Jammidodger for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. The link is in the description box below. Go give it a click. Now let's roll back to the video. Thanks for listening. So for the first half of the 1900s, trans people had lived under the radar as much as possible in what was very likely a deliberate choice, as public attention often brought with it scrutiny, hostility, and having to leave work or even move location. However, the 1950s brought about one of the first high-profile transgender people ever, Christine Jorgensen. She was born in 1926 and drafted into the US Army in 1945, and served for 1 year before pursuing a career in photography. In 1950, she went to Denmark to receive gender-affirming care, in a process that took nearly 2 years. Christine intended her transition to be private, but someone who knew why she was in Denmark told the press. Yay. A mass outing, how lovely for her. In late 1952, the New York Daily News published before and after photos of Christine with the now infamous headline, "XGI becomes blonde beauty. Operations transform Bronx youth." See, for the 1950s, that is a shockingly okay headline. That is more okay than a lot of the headlines about trans people we see now. I'm shocked by actually how okay that headline is for 1952. Anyway, Christine quickly became an international celebrity. She arranged for her return to the USA in 1953 to be a public spectacle, with hundreds of reporters being at the airport in New York. I mean, if she was put in the limelight, she was forced into the limelight, but she actually embraced the attention. Despite the frequent offensive questions and rude jokes, she saw it as a chance to take control of the narrative of her own life and advocate for the acceptance of trans people generally. A quote from her reads, "What people still don't understand is that the important thing is identity. You don't transition for sexual reasons, you do it because of who you are." She fought hard to push for acceptance for herself and other trans people, and remained an activist and educator, even when being faced with hostility, rudeness, and frequent discrimination. She spoke of the internal shift she felt when she transitioned, saying she went went from a shy, lonely, depressed person to a happy and confident person who felt truly herself. There are so many more individual trans people who truly paved the way and transitioned when it was illegal, when they had to live in secret, when they had to live double lives. And many faced intense scrutiny from those around them and sometimes the media. Yet there they were, living their lives being trans. It's funny that trans people still existed at a time where it was literally illegal and they had to be very secretive about it. In the 1960s, where places like the UK and the USA first started seeing some progress in terms of LGBTQ+ acceptance, understanding, and rights, trans people were a core component of this. As in, trans people were a core component of these rights and acceptance being progressed. We've all heard of the Stonewall riots in 1969 and the role that transgender people had to play in that. But something I didn't know about until very recently, as in doing the research for this video, is the 1966 Compton Cafeteria riot, which was a historic act of trans resistance 3 years before the Stonewall riots. A group of transgender women in San Francisco stood up to police inside Gene Compton's cafeteria, a restaurant in the Tenderloin neighborhood and a popular queer space. A trans woman who is said to be fed up of the constant harassment from police officers threw a cup of coffee in one of their faces, leading to a riot and a previously unheard moment of trans resistance against police violence. The moment could have been entirely forgotten and is not as well documented or well known as it should be, but information about it is out there because of a trans historian who was going through historical archives in 1991 and stumbled across information and an article about the Compton riot. Susan Stryker spent years digging into what happened and trying to find out more information, until eventually meeting with Amanda St. James, who was a trans woman who'd been present at the riot itself. It's another aspect and another example of trans resilience and trans history that has been very much pushed aside. And now a group of trans women are fighting hard to make sure that it's not forgotten about again. The aftermath of this 1966 riot led to a network of transgender support services being created. The National Transsexual Counseling Unit, NTCU, was founded in 1968. So this thing that literally had a positive impact and led to positive change got all but buried for like 30 years and is still very much not that known about or spoken about. Then we get to 1969 and Stonewall, where trans people's involvement still continues to be ignored and diminished even today. The Stonewall riots took place at the Stonewall Inn, one of the most popular gay bars in New York City, after it was raided by police in the early hours of the morning, and then 3 nights of unrest followed. Lesbians and trans women of color were some of the key people involved in these riots, including Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson. The first ever Pride March was then held on the 28th of June 1970, exactly 1 year after the Stonewall riot. Also in 1970, Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson founded the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which was dedicated to helping those most in need in the community. This was founded in part due to the fact that the gay liberation movement was not equal for everybody who needed it. People of color, women, and trans people were often left behind in the mainstream gay liberation movement, and so created their own organizations. And this is something that is still happening now, and we're actually seeing a reversal of some of the inclusions that we've seen happen in recent years, including earlier this year, the National Park Service website that explores the history and significance of Stonewall has had all mention of trans people removed. It's been updated to remove the T from the acronym, now just referring to the community as LGB. It's quite frankly a scary step backwards and not the only example. But going back to the history though, from the 1970s onwards, the trans community actually started to see a shift forward in rights and recognition and legal protection. In 1972, Sweden became the first country that allowed trans people to legally change their sex and provided free hormone therapy. In 1974, Angela Morley became the first openly trans person to receive an Academy Award nomination. She was a multi-Emmy Award-winning composer and publicly announced her transition in 1972. Her Oscar nomination was for Best Original Song Score, first in 1974 for The Little Prince, and then again in 1978 for The Slipper and the Rose, The Cinderella Story. In 1975, Minneapolis became the first US city to pass trans-inclusive civil rights protection legislation. The city quietly adopted an ordinance barring discrimination on the basis of having or projecting a self-image not associated with one's biological maleness or of one's biological femaleness. This policy was the first in the nation to specifically protect LGBT people in employment, labor union membership, property ownership and rental, enrollment in schools, and use of public services and accommodations. Yes, including public bathrooms. That was 50 years ago. Trans people were using the correct bathrooms for their gender before then, but 50 years ago makes you wonder why people are having a fuss right now all of a sudden, thinking that it's a problem. Many other cities followed suit over the past 5 decades, and yet, despite so many places offering this legal protection to trans people to use the bathroom of their correct gender, and not just in the States but in other countries around the world, there is absolutely absolutely zero evidence that trans inclusion in bathrooms and other gendered spaces leads to any increased danger to cis people. We remain in the history time though, so we will go back all the way to 1977, when Renee Richards, a transgender woman, was granted permission to compete in the women's category of the US Open tennis competition. She fought for a long time before being allowed to play in the tournament, and her appearance led to a lot of media attention. She was knocked out in the first round of the singles, but reached the final of the doubles with her partner Betty Ann Grubb Stewart, interestingly losing to Betty Stove and Martina Navratilova, the latter of whom is now pretty anti-trans, particularly when it comes to trans women in women's sports. Throughout the 1980s, there was more progress being made, including the founding of the Human Rights Campaign Fund, which is now America's largest civil rights organization fighting for LGBTQ+ equality. Also in 1980, the gender identity disorder diagnosis was included to the DSM. Also in the 1980s, France prohibited discrimination based on lifestyle in employment and services. And Lou Sullivan founded the FTM International, the oldest organization specifically for trans men in the United States. But it was not all on the up or good news in the 1980s, because it also saw the start of the HIV/AIDS pandemic, which as of 2024 is believed to have been the cause of over 40 million deaths. The increase in cases and the fact that LGBTQ+ people were disproportionately impacted by HIV led to a lot of stigma over gay and bisexual men in particular, and hindered research efforts. Transgender people were also disproportionately impacted, with transgender women being at an increased risk of contracting HIV as compared to the general population. Yet transgender people were very often left out of discussions concerning HIV, including reported numbers of affected people and decision-making for ongoing support and treatment. Skipping to the 1990s, we see the founding of Transgender Day of Remembrance by Gwendolyn Ann Smith, a trans woman who wanted to memorialize the murder of Rita Hester, a black trans woman from Boston. Since its founding, Trans Day of Remembrance, TDOV, has been held annually on November 20th, and in this time has evolved from a web-based project into an international day of action that honors the memory of transgender people who have lost their lives due to anti-trans violence. I want to finish this video in the year 2000, when the transgender pride flag was flown for the first time at a pride parade in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona specifically. It was created by trans woman Monica Helms in 1999, who describes the flag in the following way. The stripes at the top and bottom are light blue, the traditional colour for baby boys. The stripes next to them are pink, the traditional colour for baby girls. The stripe in the middle is white, for those who are intersex, transitioning, or consider themselves to have a neutral or undefined gender. The pattern is such that no matter which way you fly it, it is always correct, signifying us finding correctness in our lives. And that's it for the 20th century. We've gone from 1906, I think, right up until 2000. I really hope you enjoyed this look back at the more recent trans history. I genuinely found this video quite emotional and both heartbreaking and uplifting at the same time to make. There was a lot of new things that I learned, both positive and negative. But really, this combined with the first video just shows the resilience of the trans community and the fact that trans people always have and always will exist. And that we do have these fluctuations in levels of acceptance. Things do go up and down, but gradually the overall graph is a steady increase. Because of that, and if you have enjoyed this pair of videos, I could make a follow-up that is looking at the past 25 years of trans rights, both in terms of progression and the regression that we've seen in probably the past 5 to 7 years. But for now, I wanted to end it here on a positive with the trans flag being flown for the first time. Let me know what you thought. If there's anything that you want to add, if there's anything you learned, I really want to hear it. And don't forget to check out part 1 if you want to hear about the earlier side of trans history. Thank you so much for watching. You're going to see some names going up the screen of my Patreons. Thank you so much for supporting me over on Patreon, and a big shout out to my top tier Patreons: Ginger Blues, TADHG, Night Soul, Sugar Joe, Elden K, Nesta, The Third Hatman, Max Makes Mods, Della Nerving, River Champimon, Chloe, Iona Balash, TNS Mum, Sally Drew, Randy, Albar, Marv Mallow, Rachel Raptor, Jesse Imbecile, Gosco, Sienna Lamb, Slayer, Sarah Hobbs, The Paisley Prince, Riley Ray, Bildad the Shuite, AAA_Mars, The Deck of Cards, and Claire Henley. Thank you so much for your support. If you like this video, think about giving a thumbs up and subscribing, but no pressure. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Much love. Bye. Actual expectated. What the fuck? This is going to be a long video. Oh, I've got foot cramp. That's not good. The Cinderella. US Open tennis competition. I'm so done.